It began without warning. In the bustling streets of Seoul, where life thrummed with energy, a silent menace was taking hold. One by one, young adults were found dead in their apartments, workplaces, and university dormitories. There were no signs of struggle, no indications of foul play, and no clear cause of death. Healthy and full of promise one day, lifeless the next, these tragedies struck without rhyme or reason, leaving families shattered and the nation in shock. At first, the deaths were dismissed as isolated incidents. Authorities speculated that overwork, stress, or undiagnosed health issues were to blame. South Korea, a country grappling with a demanding work culture and high societal expectations, was no stranger to reports of sudden collapses among its youth. But as the numbers grew, it became impossible to ignore the pattern. Within weeks, dozens of young people had died, seemingly at random, and the media began calling it the silent killer. Panic spread quickly. Social media was flooded with rumors and theories, ranging from a new, undetected virus to covert attacks. Some whispered about supernatural causes, drawing on urban legends to explain the unexplainable. Others blamed systemic failures, pointing to unsafe housing conditions or hidden environmental threats. As fear mounted, public spaces grew quieter, and parents urged their children to stay vigilant, though no one could say against what. Amid the chaos, a few began to question why these deaths were happening and what connected the victims. The grieving mother of one victim refused to accept vague reassurances from officials. A relentless journalist saw a story that demanded answers. And a forensic scientist noticed anomalies that pointed to an invisible but lethal cause. As the mystery deepened, a nation waited in fear, desperate to unmask the silent killer before it struck again. The mysterious wave of deaths baffled authorities, leaving families desperate for answers. Initial investigations yielded no clear culprit, with causes ranging from sudden cardiac arrest to overwork-induced collapse. Frustration grew as each lead turned cold, and the deaths continued to mount. In this fog of uncertainty, an unlikely team of investigators emerged, driven by their personal stakes in the tragedy. The forensic scientist, Dr. Min Hae-jin, had seen enough unexplained deaths to know something sinister was at play. Despite pressure to close cases quickly, she couldn't ignore the anomalies. Her meticulous autopsies revealed subtle but consistent markers, red discoloration in the victim's blood and tissues, pointing to a possible environmental toxin. The findings, though inconclusive, convinced her to dig deeper. Meanwhile, journalist Lee Tae-jun was following the story closely, sensing a larger narrative hidden beneath the surface. Tae-jun's initial articles highlighted the victim's youth and apparent health, stirring public interest. But as he interviewed grieving families and visited the victims' neighborhoods, he began uncovering unsettling connections, such as shared locations and housing conditions. His instincts told him there was more to the story, and he committed to uncovering the truth. Among the grieving families was Jung So-mi, a mother whose son had died mysteriously in his dormitory. So-mi refused to accept the vague explanations offered by authorities. Her determination to find justice for her son led her to connect with other families, forming a network of voices too loud to ignore. As their paths converged, the team shared findings and theories, each contributing unique expertise. Together, they unraveled a growing list of possibilities, from workplace hazards to food contamination. But the deeper they dug, the more they realized they were confronting a danger far more insidious and far-reaching than anyone had imagined. The investigation into the mysterious deaths reached a turning point as patterns began to emerge. The forensic scientist noticed a chilling similarity in the victims. Most were found in enclosed spaces with no signs of forced entry or foul play. Initial toxicology reports showed elevated levels of carboxyhemoglobin, a chemical that forms when carbon monoxide binds to the blood's hemoglobin, effectively starving the body of oxygen. This discovery shifted the focus toward environmental causes, specifically carbon monoxide poisoning. The team began retracing the victims' final days, studying their routines and living conditions. A disturbing trend came to light. Many victims resided in older, high-density apartments common in South Korea's urban centers. These buildings often relied on outdated and poorly maintained gas heating systems, especially during the cold winter months. Further investigation revealed that many of these systems were improperly ventilated, allowing carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless, and tasteless gas, to accumulate silently. Testing of the affected buildings confirmed the worst. Gas leaks and faulty exhaust systems were prevalent, with carbon monoxide levels in some areas far exceeding safety limits. The danger was compounded by a lack of awareness. Few homes had carbon monoxide detectors, and most residents were unaware of the symptoms of poisoning, which mimic common illnesses like headaches, dizziness, and fatigue. As the forensic scientist pieced together the evidence, the journalist delved into the systemic issues that allowed the problem to persist. Investigations exposed lax enforcement of safety regulations and a culture of cost-cutting within gas companies. The grieving mother, desperate for answers, met other families who had suffered similar losses. Together, they realized this was not an isolated tragedy, but a widespread crisis. The truth was undeniable. This silent killer thrived on negligence, and unless addressed, it would claim even more lives. The revelation that carbon monoxide poisoning was the silent killer sent shockwaves across South Korea. Public anger mounted as the truth came to light. The deaths of over 1,500 young people were preventable. Protests erupted in major cities, with families of the victims at the forefront, holding photographs of their lost loved ones and demanding accountability. Citizens joined them, chanting for justice and reforms, their collective voice growing too loud to ignore. Despite the public outcry, resistance from corporations and government agencies was fierce. Gas companies, accused of neglecting safety standards, denied responsibility, blaming outdated building codes and individual negligence instead. Government officials, embarrassed by their failure to enforce stricter regulations, sought to downplay the severity of the crisis. Meetings between the families, activists, and policymakers often devolved into heated arguments, with each side blaming the other for the loss of innocent lives. Undeterred, the grieving mother leading the campaign, along with the journalist and the forensic scientist, worked tirelessly to educate the public about carbon monoxide poisoning. They organized workshops, distributed pamphlets, and held press conferences, emphasizing the importance of proper ventilation and carbon monoxide detectors. A viral video featuring heartbreaking stories of the victims further galvanized the nation. The movement faced financial challenges as legal battles with corporations drained resources. However, support poured in from unexpected sources, including international safety organizations and expatriate communities. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. A landmark moment came when the grieving mother addressed the National Assembly, her voice trembling with emotion, but filled with determination. "How many more must die before we act?" she asked, leaving the chamber in silence. Her plea resonated deeply, forcing legislators to confront the urgency of reform. Though the battle was far from over, the movement had taken a decisive step forward. The campaign for justice gained momentum as the voices of grieving families and outraged citizens grew louder. Media coverage of the tragedy painted a stark picture of the negligence that allowed so many lives to be lost. The government, under immense pressure, convened an emergency session to address the issue. New regulations were swiftly drafted, mandating annual inspections of heating systems and the compulsory installation of carbon monoxide detectors in all residential buildings. Subsidies were introduced to ensure low-income families could afford these life-saving devices, a small but significant step towards accountability. The fight wasn't without challenges. Corporations pushed back, citing the cost of retrofitting old systems and the supposed rarity of the problem. Yet, the persistence of activists, supported by scientific evidence and public outrage, left little room for debate. Lawsuits against negligent companies resulted in substantial fines, with the funds directed towards public awareness campaigns and compensation for victims' families. For the grieving mother who spearheaded the movement, the reforms brought mixed emotions. The changes represented a victory, but they couldn't erase the loss of her daughter. Standing in front of a newly erected memorial dedicated to the victims, she found solace in the knowledge that their deaths had sparked change. Her daughter's memory became a symbol of resilience, etched into the hearts of a nation determined to protect its future generations. The journalist chronicled the entire journey, from the first mysterious death to the sweeping reforms. His final article ended with a poignant reminder: the silent killer is no longer silent. It has been named, fought, and largely defeated, but the real victory lies in never forgetting its lessons. Years later, as carbon monoxide deaths sharply declined, the tragedy was remembered as a turning point. It proved the power of unity, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice.